It's amazing how far one can go filling potholes and fixing sewers. And that's indeed what mayors do, as your mayor knows. It's good to be with you today. Mr. President, it's always good to see you. It's good to see you on your home turf. Mrs. Hollowell and Mrs. Holmes and Mr. Holmes, it's wonderful that I can be a part of this. And Mr. Winston, congratulations to you for all of your work on behalf of this series. When I wasn't nervous until I looked at the people who had spoken before. So it's a good thing you did not send that to me, because I might have said, well, give me a year or two. But I am very pleased to be here. Really, I thought about it when Mamie was talking about the King Papers. In my mind, what we did was save the King Papers for Georgia. That you feel that because the University of Georgia and your president have been instrumental in helping us to develop the archival facilities that are necessary, recognizing that the papers will be in the state of Georgia and available for universities and research and others for forever. And I am very, very privileged to have been a part of that effort. But for this occasion, I'd like to say that it is humbling for me to stand here on a program named for a young man and a young woman who were my shiro and hero when I was in high school. I graduated from high school in 1963. So the desegregation or the removal of the color line and the barriers for Charlayne, Hunter-Gault, and for Hamilton Holmes are real to me because it is my history. It is a history of my time. And as such, I remember what else was going on at the time. And I can remember how proud I was as a young person that these two young people were leading the way for literally hundreds and thousands of students who now walk through the door and have opportunities that were not available unilaterally before. So it is with great pleasure that I join you on this occasion. Recognize the commitment, indeed, of the University of Georgia to commemorate their courage and vision, their perseverance, their willingness to be different, and the university's willingness to embrace that difference matters. And indeed, that's what you do. Celebration. Not only was I, then I saw everybody else who's been here. And they are also sheroes. Mrs. Lowry and Andrew Young was one of my mentors. So he probably said everything I would say and then some. I worked for him for 8 years, and if you are going to give credit to someone for why we have the King Papers, it was Andrew Young, who came to me and said, Shirley, I think there's something else you need to do. And that something else was in 2 weeks to find the money to bring the paper. So for those of you who are young, when one of your mentors calls, usually they don't call for anything easy. Usually they're calling for something that they know, or they will say you are uniquely qualified to do. And given the contributions they make to your life, you usually say, yes, sir, or yes, ma'am. And you do life. So I'd like to start, however, with a quote from a noted and renowned American author who was a Barnard anthropology graduate. Zora Neale Hurston said, "Those that don't got can't show it. Those who got it can hide it. Those who got it can hide it." History has recorded the fact that Hamilton Holmes and Charlayne Hunter had it and couldn't hide it. They may not have fully grasped the scope and impact of their decision in 1961, but they showed unbelievable resolve and courage in the face of some pretty tremendous obstacles. Some would say even hatred. But those obstacles included just the challenge to themselves that they may not be able to succeed. It is no coincidence that desegregation was so vigorously challenged in education, for it is education that is the platform that offers the greatest hope for America's disenfranchised and those who are locked out of the mainstream. I suspect those of you who grew up under the Dr. Spock School of Child Rearing, as I did, will recall your parents saying that the one thing that no one could ever take away from you was your education. And occasionally they'd say, and your reputation. So if you have your reputation intact and you are educated, the doors of America will open. I remember hearing that at 5, 6, 10, 12, 15 years old. And I suspect we ought to repeat it a little bit more in today's world. His autobiography recounted a conversation he had with his master about slaves learning to read. If he learns to read, he's quoted as saying, the Bible, it will forever unfit him to be a slave. He should know nothing but the will of his master and learn to obey it. As to himself, learning will do him no good, but a great deal of harm, making him disconsolate and unhappy. If you teach him how to read, he'll want to know how to write, and this accomplished, he'll be running away with himself. Well, indeed, our challenge as adults is to be sure that our young people can run away with themselves, run away with their dreams. Indeed, the history of this university, going back many generations, all the way up to the present, is to ensure that young people and our state and all those who cross through the arch, right? I got it. I'm getting the nomenclature. That they indeed can have dreams that allow them to change the world for the better. So even before the landmark Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka decision and the admission of Holmes and Hunter, there had been attempts to desegregate law schools to challenge the Equal Accommodations Law, since there were very few law schools open to African Americans. My father was a graduate of Howard University's law school, and I tell the story, and I will tell it at the University of Pennsylvania if given the chance, that he was admitted to the University of Pennsylvania, but could not afford law school, but could not afford to go to school in the early 1940s because there was no ability for him to pay the $500 tuition at one time. So he had the intellectual capacity, as did generations of Georgians before Hunter and Holmes. But the accessibility is more than just the ability to perform in the classroom. The accessibility to education also speaks to the financing and the need for financing. So my dad was a lucky man, Thurgood Marshall University Law School, as was Whitney Young teaching at the school, and he called them and said, my mother said, I either have to go to school or I have to work, and so I'm calling you because I'd like to go to school. And they arranged for him to babysit and work odd jobs that he might graduate from law school. The NAACP challenged segregation in law schools at the University of Maryland, University of Missouri, University of Georgia before the 1954 decision. You know her, Miss Lucy, had been admitted to the University of Alabama. The Little Rock Nine had desegregated Central High School in Arkansas. A year before this college was desegregated, 4 black male college students launched the desegregation of Woolworth's lunch counters, which sparked dozens of other student sit-ins and the establishment of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or as we fondly refer to it as SNCC. U.S. Georgia Congressman Lewis was an outspoken student leader, as was Julian Bond and Carolyn Long Banks and Herschel Challoner and Lonnie King and others. When I went to the March on Washington in 1963 as a freshman in college, and I don't want you to think I did anything spectacular. I was going to school in Washington, D.C., and everyone else was going. So I don't put myself up on a pedestal. Sometimes you're just in the right place. And part of succeeding in life is being in the right place. And education helps you to do that. I was taken, obviously, as everyone else was, by Dr. King's message. But I was equally taken by this young firebrand, John Lewis, who spoke from his heart. And we are told years later that his speech had to be toned down because it was too radical for the time. But indeed, in his early 20s, John Lewis gave hope to many young people that they could lead. By the time Holmes and Hunter came to Georgia in 1961, there was a very visible and vocal student movement already taking root across the country. It is important for us to remember that it was students who led much of the dissent and protest of the early 60s. And indeed, it is students, I believe, who have to lead us in this new century, which is the other reason that I came. I don't believe that there is any time better spent, and this is not to talk about anyone over 21 here, but any time better spent than speaking with and listening to students and young people in America. Because the future of our country is absolutely dependent on their engagement, their education, their creativity, and their innovation. So that is the second reason. But indeed, students knew that they had it and they couldn't hide it. But they wanted a different America. And they were willing to sacrifice everything to get it. So we owe them, all of us, owe them a debt of gratitude for their personal sacrifice and for their willingness to face incredible odds at the time. As a student of the 60s, I didn't have the courage, as I've described to you, though many of the students in SNCC were classmates of mine at Howard. And indeed, some of them were even among the Freedom Riders. And I thought then, and I think now, that the Freedom Riders were the craziest people of the time. The nerve of getting on a bus, knowing that people at the bus stop want to kill you. And you get on the bus unarmed in the sense that you don't have a weapon, but your weapon is your courage, your faith in God, your willingness to sacrifice absolutely everything in exchange for the freedom that we enjoy today. So those that don't got it can't show it. Those who got it can hide it. I say that the people in this room and across this campus have it, and you can't hide it. So what does that mean in today's world? What it means is that you have some obligation, the same kind of obligation that I feel. Surely, I fill potholes, as I've mentioned. We pave streets. We are responsible for police services and fire services. We are especially responsible for clean water, thanks to the federal courts who have made it so. And we are pleased that we can make a contribution to clean water and streams in Georgia. But as an African American woman who lived through a history that I didn't really contribute to in a particularly great way, I stand here because other people who did not know me and will never know me took the challenge that the door could be opened for me. And as such, I feel that I have a special obligation to fight against all of those curses: classism, sexism, all the phobias, racism, in any form that we find it. Now, does that mean I forego my day-to-day job? No. Indeed, I have to perform like the mayor of any other city. People want their budgets balanced. They want to know that the airport is open when they show up to take off from Hartsfield-Jackson. They want all the normal city services. But if we are to really honor those who come before us in the name of Hunter and Holmes, we have to do something a little bit different. We say every year when we celebrate Dr. King's birthday, it's relatively easy to celebrate the dream and to remember the dream. It is relatively easy to celebrate the historic steps of these two fine students. It is terrific, actually, but it really isn't good enough. You cannot hide the fact, as a university, that it is because of their challenge and those who helped them that at least half the audience is sitting here at all today. Is that not right? Half has benefited too. The other half has benefited too. So the applause is not for me, it is for how far we've come, that we might have these opportunities. That young men and young women of all backgrounds, Latino Americans, Asian Americans, African Americans, women, gay and straight, fraternity, sorority, and non-Greek, athletes and non-athletes. I think there's some non-athletes at the University of Georgia, right? No, I know that. That was a joke. Just wanted to loosen you up a little bit. Because if you're not laughing and friendly, you won't take to heart what I'm really trying to say that's serious. Which is that I think you need to be comfortable with the history of the last 40 years. And my hope is that you will get more comfortable with what you can do about the next 40 years. Will people look back on this period and realize that the University of Georgia is truly open to any student who can meet academic standards? That's a mouthful. You are a sought-after school. But the University of Georgia still is beyond the financial means of the Eugene Clarks of my dad's era. You can start breathing. There are still too many people who are locked out by virtue of birth of condition, of financial condition. Now, you don't want to believe that's true, but let me tell you, it is true. It's not just true here, it's true in every university across the country. But we're not responsible for every university. You know, I had a chance to speak at Tuskegee University recently, and I'm going to close. And it's very easy to talk at Tuskegee, which is the founding president is Booker T. Washington, one of the greatest Americans ever. Booker T. Washington is famous for an Atlanta Compromise speech, which is dissected related to its political relevance in universities and in dialogues all over America. It was debated when I was a student. It is still debated in political science. But I think if you take it out of the political analysis and look at what he said from an economic standpoint, what he said is this, and actually a social responsibility standpoint. What he said is, start where you are. Cast down your bucket here. What that means is start where you are. Don't worry about what they're doing at Georgia Southern or Georgia Tech or West Georgia or Clark or Spelman or the University of North Carolina, Vanderbilt, whoever you think your competition is. where you are. Cast down your bucket here. And he didn't add this word, but he meant it. Now. He didn't say that. But he meant now. And we have the advantage of studying it now so that we can understand what he meant. And most people talk about that speech being an alternative to aspirations beyond the African American community. But indeed, you have to do both. And Booker T. Washington got it right. We don't have to aspire to help people thousands of miles away. We can do that, but that does not absolve us from the responsibility to do what we can in our own environment. Now, how do we do that? You get to decide. I don't give you a prescription. You don't have to do what I do. If each of us does our part to help that person who is the least likely to get any help, it can be a classmate down the dorm hall who you know is struggling. It can be a student who's too shy to speak, but had the grades and the SAT scores and the recommendations and the well-rounded, I'm sure you say, well-rounded background for acceptance, but who, for some reason, isn't performing. But it is a down of students who would not get here unless they have some special help. The Hope Scholarship is a dream come true for many students. But I know, and you know, that the Hope Scholarships is just the down payment on a year's education at the University of Georgia. It is just a down payment. If the university education on an annual basis costs somewhere around $20,000 to $25,000 a student, the university has to raise some of that money, and some of it is paid by fees. There are many students who cannot afford not a dime to come. And I'll close with one story and then one quote. I've quoted some very illustrious people. You're going to like this last quote. We need, across Georgia, University of Georgia, or joined with the University of Georgia, need-based scholarships. Let me explain something. If you don't have any money, I don't mean instead of academically qualified. I'm talking about academically qualified, able to perform. I'm not talking about eliminating lowering standards, moving toward lower standards. I'm not talking about remedial courses. But I am saying for the student who does qualify, somehow or another we need to remove the financial burden that they cannot bear. Now, I know how hard it is to raise money, and I know how hard your president works on that. But somehow or another we've got to this issue. Otherwise, we will continue to educate those who can get to the educational institution and leave out all the others. Now, in addition to being responsible for potholes and sewers, I'm responsible for police and public safety. There is no prescription for lowering crime that does not include raising education levels. You can't do it. It won't happen. Societies and communities that have placed the highest criteria and priority on education have less crime at every level. You don't wipe it out, but you do reduce it substantially. Today in Georgia, just speaking about African Americans, half are born into poverty. Half are born into poverty. In the city of Atlanta, the poverty level is upwards to 25%. Most of that is children and senior citizens. Well, let's just assume for a moment we're concentrating on the young people. I know today in Atlanta, having run a very small, modest program. It's 2 years old. It's not theory-based. It's practicum-based. We went to school and, in fact, have met with almost 3,000 high school graduating seniors one-on-one personally and helped them to develop a plan. I already know, because I've had consultants tell me, that for $25 million to $30 million in endowment, every graduating senior from Atlanta public schools could go to college. We could close the financial gap. Now, I want you to put that number up against what we spend money on every day in the state of Georgia and the United States. That's 1,800 graduates, many of whom can make it on their own, but about half of whom are going to need some help. An average of $2,000 per student per year is all it takes to close the gap between hope, between financial aid packages, but it is the difference for students staying in school. So, the question is, will the University of Georgia, under the able and inspired leadership of your president, the Board of Regents, all of the other people, the donors who all make this possible, decide that they want to take a step in 2007 that is as radical as Charlayne Hunter-Gault, Hamilton Holmes, and attorney Donald Hollowell. That when we sit in this audience 10, 15, 20 years from now, we won't question whether the children with the least have had a chance. The least financially. I'll tell you a story and then I'll close. I went to Washington High School, and I know that I've heard from your program host Project Grad in the summer months, and Washington High School is a Project Grad school, and millions of dollars have been raised to do mentoring to get the high school graduation rate up. And it is in fact high. In 2005, in an auditorium about this size, there were 200 students. And I went around one by one, asked them to tell me what they were planning to do next, 1 week before high school graduation in May. And I got to one young man, and he said, "I want to go to college. I don't think I can." I said, "Okay, why don't you think you can?" He said, "Well, I don't have a 3.0 GPA, and therefore I can't get the Hope Scholarship. And my parents we live at the poverty line, but not below it, which means you don't qualify for federal funding and the Pell Grant." I said, "Okay." He knew a lot about it. I said, "What was your SAT?" African American male, inner city, Washington High School, never been to an SAT prep class, 1310. True story. He had not filled out an application, not because he wasn't smart, but you know why? He couldn't figure out how to pay for it. Now, clearly, even with that SAT score, he probably would not have made the cut at the University of Georgia. But there are colleges and universities where he could. This young man was working at Six Flags theme park. And he was very excited because he was already a supervisor. So he's in charge of 3 or 4 other people at the ride. He wanted to go to college, but he couldn't see his way to do that. So he was about to enter a career of seasonal jobs. The year that he took the SAT, there were 2,000 approximately African American students anywhere in America with SAT scores above 1,300. That's pretty amazing. How did he slip through the cracks? Well, that's a good question, but the best question is, what do you do about it when you realize he has? He is exactly the kind of student we have to recruit. not terrible grades, not great. I assured him that if every CEO in America who was a 2.8, 2.9 in high school and college had to resign, there'd be a lot of vacancies. I assured him that we wanted him to do better, doing much better in college, but not having done it in high school does not forever put you in a class of not being able to do it any time in your life. We cannot throw away 17 and 18-year-olds. America will not be strong if 17 and 18-year-olds are not allowed access. So, we started with Zora Neale Hurston and Frederick Douglass. But for the young people in the audience, let's finish with Ludacris. Reach your hand up in the air and you can play with the stars. It's not the hand you're dealt, but how you're playing your cards. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I hope it wasn't what you expected. You were so well versed in all the fine thinking and competitive ideas. I wanted to give you just a little bit of the view of the world from the mayor's office, from potholes to sewers to responsibility. So thank you very much. I'm more than happy to hear comments or take questions if that is of your interest. You that shy? You know, you put a politician behind a microphone, I can talk all day. But I won't if you don't want me to. Yes?
When I was thinking about coming yesterday on the bus, I thought of two women that came before and Barbara Jordan. Who were your mentors?
Well, both of those are good. I worked in Shirley Chisholm's as a college student. I just happened to be in the right place. Remember that? I worked in Shirley Chisholm's congressional office and in her presidential campaign as a volunteer. She would not have known me at all. But I was privileged to be a part of kind of the field operation, which meant that I stuffed envelopes and put on stamps and the clerical work. She was clearly a very bold and ingenious woman. But when it comes to the inspiration, I think of Barbara Jordan and the role that she played in the Congress much later in my life, and the role that she played in the Texas legislature. So Barbara Jordan remained a role model for me for a much longer period of time. When I think of women historically, though, one of my favorites is Harriet Tubman. People hear me talk about that. Harriet Tubman had the creativity, the intelligence to recognize there was a problem. She was in slavery. The creativity to figure out a solution, I say, which is to escape successfully. And then really the courage to do it. And not just do it for herself. My favorite stories about Harriet is that after going back and forth to take out more slaves, she went to her former husband. And she came to him. He was still enslaved. And he had a new lady friend. And I've learned a lot from this. She offered to take them both out. Obviously, he didn't have there was no telegraph, no telephone. He didn't know whether she was alive or dead. But she was forgiving enough to recognize that he had to move on. The kicker in the story, however, he wouldn't go. So that means to me that there's so many lessons there. That she had the capacity to reach out to everyone even when she was hurt. And he couldn't figure out that capacity. He didn't have the capacity to be free. So it's important for us to remember that some of us won't have it on our own, so to speak. And what we can learn in universities and colleges is to develop the capacity to be free. Free for open to new ideas. Free and open to new people. Free and open to a new you, which might be the hardest one to do. So Harriet Tubman's life gives me many lessons to this very day. But there are certainly many women who have been strong role models. Most of my role models growing up, however, were men. I think a few of you will remember that there were few women on television and very few African Americans, if any. And that the roles that we played were demeaning to a large extent. But we've seen a new day. And the question really is, what new day are we willing to create? And that really brings me back to Harriet all the time. She did not go back to free slaves the same way she went the last time. She had to create a new route, a new approach. If she repeated the same process every single time, she wouldn't have been successful. And here is a woman who's virtually uneducated, but with her God-given talents, was willing and able to grow into a leadership role. So those are some of my thoughts about Harriet. Yes?
Mayor Franklin, I live in Watkinsville, Georgia, so I was not able to vote for you, but I would have if I made a comment at some time in the future, you will be running for something so that I will be able to vote for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good quote. You're very kind to say that. I don't have political aspirations directed to young people. I did not have political aspirations at all. I had 2 mentors and a few girlfriends who came to me and insisted that I give running for mayor serious consideration. And I resisted for 3 or 4 years. I'm hard-headed. And finally, I took a year to think about it. I had to think how it would, consider how it would impact my family, my children, and my aging parents. I had to consider how I would afford to run, because it's an expensive proposition, and I'm a working person with modest income. I had to consider, finally, I tried to consider how it would feel and whether this was something that I could grow into. But that was my final consideration. It was not my aspiration first. It was my responsibility first. My responsibility to my family, my responsibility to them, and both financially and otherwise, time-wise. But important lesson I learned, I was in my mid-50s at the time, important lesson I learned is that I couldn't see something in myself that other people could see. So for young people, it is important to be surrounded by, in relationship to, people who are challenging you to grow and to be different and better. If you go into a shell, I would still be doing what I was doing, which is, what day is this, Tuesday? I would have some consultant meetings, and then by Friday morning, I'd be at the movies. I went to all the first-run movies. It was a very pleasant lifestyle. But the fact of the matter is, I have never had a position or responsibility that is more fulfilling than this one. And I almost missed it because I didn't see it in myself. So it's very important who you associate with, because they can often help you to see things either in yourself or your circumstance that you're completely blind to. And it will come as no surprise to you because you've had such wonderful speakers. I never did any public speaking before I ran for office. I ran from the microphone. I wasn't like Mamie, getting up here just being all sassy. You know? I never in a million years would have done that because I didn't have the self-confidence to do it. I learned to do public speaking as a result of campaigning, and I hope that I'm getting better and better at doing so. And some people say that I'm getting better because I'm more me and that I'm not trying to be you in how I present. So it's a little non-traditional approach, but it's worked so far. Yes, I love this. 3 women in a row. That's actually in my notes, and I didn't speak to it. But our program is for everyone who graduates, whether they have documents or not. And there are some institutions in the university system, maybe I shouldn't announce this, that have helped us with that. And in some institutions, we paid 100% of tuition and fees. Students are from China. One student was from China, 12, 15, 30 on the SAT. The first year, she's in her second year now, she had a 3.8. She could not afford to go to school because she was undocumented. Her family was undocumented, she was. But we arranged for tuition. Another had about the same SAT and a high GPA. She had a 4.1 her first year. 4.0 the first year at a Georgia college and university. She was from Morocco. We have students from Guinea. We have students from Mexico, Guatemala, you name it. Bermuda. There's this notion that the only undocumented students in Georgia are from Mexico. That is not true. So the first year we had about 6 students, and this last year we've had a few more. But any student who comes to us gets the assistance they need. And in most cases, that's meant that we've had to pay 100% of tuition and fees, which is a pretty high, you know what that is, right? So it's pretty high. And here, if they were to come to the University of Georgia, we'd have to pay tuition fees and room and board because they can't, you've got to live here. So I am a very strong spokesperson for national policy on immigration. It's controversial, but it doesn't bother me a whole lot because I think the Georgia economy and economies of other parts of the country are dependent on the immigrants who are here and the people who are living among us. And there are certain industries that are absolutely dependent. The construction industry is one, not the only one. And I applaud President Bush on this issue. And would very much look forward to some kind of negotiated immigration policy that is federal policy that does not leave it to states, whether it's Georgia or Iowa, to resolve these issues. America is really rich enough to educate every child. It really is. America is rich enough to educate every child. Not every child should come or can come to the University of Georgia. But there are hundreds, over 4,000 colleges, universities, and 2-year colleges in America. And every child can get an education. And if we don't do that, then 40 years from now, our grandchildren and great-grandchildren are going to look back on us at this time and say, we were asleep at the wheel. So thank you for asking that question, because that's one I care a lot about. Thank you very much.
Mayor, I'm going to ask you to join me one more time.
I don't want the mayor to go back to Atlanta under the impression that men don't ask questions.
We've come a long way, America.
As I travel around the world, people ask me what makes Mayor Franklin so successful. Now I know what it is. You're wonderful, you're practical, and I hope somebody will take you that proposal for $29 million to educate the capable and poor people seriously. And I would like to ask you whatever I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
As this is the Holmes-Hunter Lecture, I do want to give the last question to Ms. Marilyn Holmes.
It's not a question, but you asked it in the comments, and I just want to say I have attended almost all of the 29 lectures, and I can clearly say you had no reason to be nervous.
Thank you. You're very generous.
We're almost done. We're going to do a couple of things very quickly. First and foremost, on behalf of the University of Georgia, Mayor Franklin, I'd like to present to you this token of our appreciation for you coming and doing this today. Let's give her another hand.
Thank you.